Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Regionalni direktor Međunarodne organizacije za migraciju za Europu i Centralnu Aziju, Erken, za Al Jazeeru govori o migracijama u svijetu i regiji, migrantskim rutama, stranim radnicima i integraciji. Mr. Erken, welcome to the program of Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me.
I would like to start with a topic that I'm aware is one of the top priorities for IOM this year, but as well is a very slowly becoming a very important topic in our region of the Western Balkans. It's the labor mobility. So I would like to hear more about if you could elaborate on the key objectives of IOM's new labor mobility strategy and how it aims to address current challenges we have in labor migration within Europe and Central Asia, specifically because of your role.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. So increasingly, of course, migration is actually being seen as an instrument, as a driver for innovation and economic growth. And this, of course, is particularly important for countries that are actually facing right now what we call a demographic decline. So countries that are really being characterized by low fertility, so the number of children per woman is declining. There's a lot of out-migration in countries, and particularly we see that in the Western Balkans. So what we're trying to do is engage government and civil society partners in the issue of how labor migration in this case, can offset some of that decline in population size. And this is important because if that were not to happen, we see, of course, a large depopulation happening in the Western Balkans. And of course, that will put into danger, really, the viability of countries, particularly the economic and social viability of countries. So what we're trying to promote is to see that the Western Balkans is not only being seen as it is now, really, as a transit area for migrants. So they're coming through the Western Balkans and then try to get into particularly Western Europe, to actually say, let's see what migration can do to offer solutions here with regards to labor shortages that Western Balkan countries, and particularly also, of course, Bosnia and Herzegovina, are actually facing. So we also, as an agency, try to move a little bit away from the management of irregular migration towards a transition where we try to support countries and governments and employers to see how we can actually keep some of those migrants here that will then help build the countries up, particularly economically and socially.
And tell me, this is regarding Western Balkans. Are these labor mobility topics? Are they a topic elsewhere, especially within your scope of work? We said you work for Central Asia and Europe.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a phenomenon only for the Western Balkans at all. Actually, I would submit that this issue of declining fertility, declining population size, the demographic challenges that are being faced by Europe in its totality. This is not just an issue for Western Balkans. And so what is really interestingly happening at the moment in Europe is a duality between the short-term problems that countries, the current problems that countries face with regards to irregular migration, but at the same time, the long-term need to beef up the workforce in European countries. So the issue of labor mobility, the issue of attracting talent from elsewhere is an issue that confronts Europe in its totality.
Can I just, before we switch to the other topic, I would just like to hear, it is evident that IOM as an international organization has recognized these new trends and the importance of helping facilitate them. However, are European governments aware of this?
They are aware of it, but of course it's also fair to say that they are, of course, being confronted by the current challenges to the asylum system, for instance, as a result of irregular migration. So obviously countries are obliged to deal with that issue at the moment. And of course, this is what really drives, of course, the current attention by many European countries, and how to deal with the issue of irregular migration, how to deal with the issue of the asylum system that is really being overloaded with cases. And so that's understandable. And the role of IOM is really to, one, of course, help governments and countries with that issue, which is a legitimate issue, of course. At the same time, also paint that more larger and longer term picture of the overall decline in population size in Europe, and that's very pronounced. And Eurostat has, of course, done many projections around the population decline. To then also, while we're dealing and governments dealing with the short term, the current problem around irregular migration, at the same time, of course, engage with governments around the long-term perspective of where migration needs to probably come in to at least make sure that the workforce is not further declining, and how at least labor migration can offset some of that decline in the workforce.
Climate migration is becoming a pressing issue globally. How is your organization preparing for sure an expected increase in climate-induced displacements in the future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very important question. Of course, the issue of climate change in and of itself, of course, is very much in the news. At the moment, about 1.7 billion people out of 8 billion people in the world are being affected by climate-induced changes. And obviously, in many ways, this drives, of course, the desire or the need to change places, to move, to pack up your belongings and see if there are better opportunities elsewhere. Already, I mean, 26.4 million people are actually displaced in 2023 as a result of climate changes in the environment, in the areas that they are living in. So it's, again, an additional driver of out-migration, an additional driver for people to leave their countries and their areas that they live in. And so it's important that, one, we establish the link between climate-induced changes and people on the move. And at the same time, of course, make sure that two things happen. One, that we build up the resilience of communities to probably also deal with climate change and climate-induced changes in their countries, so that the desire or the need to leave at least is being mitigated. But at the same time, of course, when people decide to move because they have no other choice, that again, the international community, and through their support also from the International Organization for Migration, migrants that are on the move are being protected on the way to places where they hopefully can have a better life.
Mr. Erken, a topic that is inevitable when we speak about migration, when we speak about migrants and refugees, especially when we talk about Europe, is integration of these populations, both in Europe and in the Western Balkans. What initiatives is IOM implementing to promote social cohesion and integration in host communities?
Yeah, this is, of course, the success of migration and the success of migrants, but also hosting communities, has a lot to do and is very much dependent on the ability and the success of the integration of migrants coming from different areas of the world. So a lot of what we also invest in is an issue of cohesion, of social cohesion, of the acceptance of migrants in the communities. But we also do a lot already on pre-departure. So when migrants know they're going to a certain country, we do a lot on pre-departure orientation, so that migrants know what the country and the culture and often the language is in the country that they are going to. So there's a lot happening pre-departure, if we call it, pre-people leaving. And at the same time, of course, we invest a lot of our support and our activities in the cohesion in the new communities. And that has a lot to do with getting to know each other, facilitating dialogue among host communities and migrant communities that are coming to their new communities. A lot to do with making sure that they are adapting and speak the language, or at least understand the language. are culturally aware of the country that they are living in, or the community that they're living in, because the success, as I said, of migration hinges a lot on this issue of social integration into the new community. And if we don't pay a lot of attention on that, then we often see, of course, that migration might not be so successful as it should be and as it could be, and as a contributor, as I said already, to innovation and growth of host communities. So this issue is critical and key to the success, both for host communities as well as for migrants coming into a new community to build up a new life over there.
If I may add, migration and stance on migration, exactly this topic we just spoke about, is increasingly becoming one of the most important topics for political campaigns in Europe. And we are witnessing certain polarizations within Europe regarding migration. If I may just add another question to this one, do you see what's the responsibility of governments? We understand that IOM does what it does. It has the initiatives. You just told us a very interesting information about educating migrants before coming to certain countries. This is, I think, to most people an unknown fact. However, this is an international organization. You cannot cover the whole scope. Do you feel there should be more done by European countries to implement this integration, proper integration and social cohesion?
Well, I think the role that IOM has is at least to make governments aware that this issue of social integration is a critical component for the success of migration into a country. And we have also ways in which we can help and facilitate those processes for governments. Look, we should also not forget that the issue of irregular migration is a challenge to governments, and there's no denying about that. So it's something that sometimes does create an environment, or does create resistance to migration, because there is a legitimate probably reason to feel that the system is not conducive, the system is not capable of dealing with the influx of irregular migration. All the more reason, of course, why an organization like IOM is working with governments to actually facilitate and ease the transition of migrants into their communities, so that this is being done in a smooth way. But also, I think, working a lot with governments while they're dealing with the current problem and the current challenges around irregular migration, at the same time, as I said, pivot and talk with governments about the issue of regular migration and regular pathways to migration, so that the elements of integration, the elements of mixing and matching skills with what employers need, etc. These are important elements, and these are important factors what makes migration successful. And so our role is very much to work on these dual challenges: the challenge of today with the long-term challenge of the demographic decline, the issue of the workforce decline, the issue of how you keep social services and pensions, etc., payable in the future, for which an additional workforce might be needed. And it's in those two challenges that IOM is really working with governments. Can something done be more? I'm sure, but I'm also, as I said, be mindful of the fact that it is often a real challenge to governments to deal with irregular migration. I'm right now in Lipa, in a transit reception center for migrants in northwestern part of Bosnia. If I see what the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina has done in recent years, it's phenomenal. It's a problem that they didn't create, of course, but nevertheless have to deal with. And I'm proud and I'm happy that we, as International Organization for Migration, can at least help the government, at least facilitate to the best of our abilities the role that a government has, recognizing the challenges, but at the same time, of course, looking for solutions in which this part of migration can be facilitated and managed in a humane way, in an orderly way, in a safe way as much as possible. And that's our role, really.
Mr. Erken, you just mentioned you are in Lipa, you are currently in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia has remained a key transit point for migrants aiming to enter the European Union, as we said. However, especially due to stricter controls in the neighboring countries. And you just told us that you applaud the work that the Bosnia-Herzegovina government has done. However, we're interested in to hear how is your organization supporting and has supported the country and the region in managing these migration flows?
Well, to a large extent, of course, because through the way that we are managing, certainly in the beginning part of the crisis, particularly starting with the Syria crisis in 2015, by actually helping and managing these transit and reception centers, and an important role for us was actually to in that sense to unburden the government with that responsibility and help the government managing and taking on certain jobs and certain tasks that was at that time difficult for the government probably to take because of all the magnitude and the influx and the speed with which the influx happened. What we now see, and the active discussion that we are engaging right now with the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina, is to transition the responsibility and the ownership, if you will, for the management of migration to the government. And this is something that I'm really pleased to see and also very hopeful to see that the government is willing and capable more and more to help with the migration flows into the country. And for us then, at the same time, transition into a new role, which is really the issue that we just discussed about labor mobility, to help the government also with and employers to deal with the labor shortages that Bosnia-Herzegovina is actually experiencing right now, and not just Bosnia-Herzegovina, the whole Balkans, and actually Europe in general, to really see how migration can offset and actually facilitate easing the burden on the declining workforce. So it's very nice and interesting to see this transition, and I applaud the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina for the role that it's taking on. I was just as in Lipa right now. It's a transit center, a reception center for migrants close to the Bihać city. We discussed with the mayor the transition from IOM and management of the transition camp in Bihać to the government and the local authorities. And this is just, I have to applaud it. This is really something that needs to be commended.
I would just like to ask you, just within a year or two, you just spoke about it, we have witnessed and seeing Bosnia go from a transit route country to a destination for foreign workers. What does this tell us about the quick to change trends in migration in this world we live in?
Yeah, a good question. And I think you actually said it already. It is indeed a remarkable transformation that is happening, but also a remarkable transformation in mindset and attitude from governments in this region in particular, that saw themselves for a very long time probably as facilitating the irregular migration as a transit route for migrants going into particularly the European Union, to a situation where increasingly governments and also, of course, private sector are realizing that in the long run, also the countries in the Western Balkans, Bosnia-Herzegovina as well, need to probably attract talent and attract migrants. And I think that realization is an interesting transformation that's happening. And as you said, the nature of the thinking around migration and migrants is really phenomenal that we see probably throughout Europe, but certainly also in this region. And IOM has been instrumental in facilitating that thinking, to say to governments, just don't see yourself as a transit, but actually start thinking, should some of these people not probably stay here and be facilitating into this society, because they can contribute in the factories, in the service industry, in the hotels. I was very happy in the hotel I stayed in Sarajevo. I saw the waitress in the restaurant were, in the cafe and the restaurant of the hotel were from Nepal, and perfectly integrated and providing services for visitors to Sarajevo. And I think this is the future of migration, really.
Mr. Erken, for the end, if you could change one policy or public perception about migration in Europe and Central Asia, what would it be and why?
I mean, I personally hope that over time the narrative around migration that I witness, of course, as a European myself, will change. As you rightly said in the beginning of the interview, at the moment, migration is driving public discourse, is driving political discourse, is even influencing national elections from the negative aspect of migration, probably, you know, driven by what we just discussed, the magnitude probably of irregular migration and coming in. And I hope that over time we can change that narrative and see migration as a driver and a force for good, and a driver and a force for further economic development of Europe. It's interesting to see that one of the pillars of the EU Commission is a competitive Europe, and in that spirit, migration will play an important role to attract talent, and talent at all levels, for Europe to stay competitive in a very competitive world, etc. To also make sure that the standards of living are maintained or even increased. So over time, I really hope that in a few years' time, we don't talk about migration as something that's a problem, to migration that's an enormous driver and a source for innovation, for growth. And we talk positive about it as an instrument for economic and social well-being in Europe.
Mr. Erken, thank you for this interview. Thank you for speaking to Al Jazeera Balkans.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?